Good afternoon from Vienna. Welcome to Sinopress interview. Human rights, a topic as old as humanity itself, has never ceased to attract attention or been a hot topic, hot issue throughout human civilization. Thomas Jefferson wrote in the U.S. Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal, but easy said, difficult done. Throughout history, human rights issues have faced all kinds of challenges, confrontations, causing dilemma or impasse. What is human rights going on? What's happening right now as far as human rights are concerned in Europe, in Asia, or in other continents? What is the future of humanity? Today, we are delighted and honored to have Dr. Ernst Löschner as our distinguished guest to talk about this hot issue.
So here I am.
A warm welcome to you, Dr. Löschner.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Take a seat, please.
Thank you. By Sinopress. Is that how you pronounce it?
Sinopress, yes.
I did a little research, and I'm taken in by the breadth of the topics that you are covering, from culture to medicine to human rights, the whole spectrum. And I understand that you want to present the true objective picture of China, and interviewing people who think they have something to say to these topics. So I'll try.
Thank you very much, Dr. Löschner. I believe we have some Chinese tea here. Would you like to try it?
Very much. Thank you.
Look, this is oolong, 铁观音, half fermented tea. Try it to see if you like it.
Thank you. Very becoming.
Dr. Löschner, we all know you are a veteran human rights advocator in Austria. In the past years, you have been dedicating so much to human rights protection, promotion, and a lot of achievements too. I remember a book published in 2013 with this title. I brought a book here. In this book, I have noticed there are more than approximately 30,000 signatures collected, and also a lot of celebrities there too. I believe a lot of work involved here. Could you tell us something about this book?
Yes, with great pleasure. Actually, I have to downpedal my role. I wouldn't call myself a human rights activist. I'm, of course, very much concerned about human rights situation all across the world. I'm a former banker. I'm a banking executive, and later on in my life, I came across a situation which I just had to accept because it was so unreal as it happened. When I found out that Jewish refugees after the war had crossed the Alps. And it was a totally forgotten situation, and I decided that should not remain forgotten, and so I revived this. But we can tell later on about Alpine peace crossing. But as part of this work, I came across refugees now in Austria and realized their problems, and asked myself, what can I do to contribute that maybe their situation could be improved? So this book, which wasn't actually published as a book, it's a documentary, it's a documentation of this initiative, which I started together with 13 major NGOs in Austria.
13 major NGOs in Austria?
Yes. Ranging from Caritas to, you can actually, if I may show it to you here, we have Amnesty International here, we have Doctors Without Borders, Diakonie, so Volkshilfe, so 13 major NGOs. And what it was an appeal to the government, a petition with 5 particular demands that we proposed to the government and to Parliament to change the laws so that they become more humane, that we treat people in a more decent manner compared to, well, the actual situation. So I was trying to, with this initiative, to bring about change.
A lot of work done, I believe.
It was.
Yeah.
It was a lot of work.
I'm full of respect for
collecting
this.
all the signatures, but if you allow me, I may quote a certain Helen Chung in this book here, and what intrigued me with your there were 300 personalities whom we asked for a personal statement. And the statement that Ellen Chung said at the time is one that touches me personally very much, and you will know in a moment why. I must also think of the picture of the couple, a medical couple, who were refugees from China with their children, who came to Austria to apply for asylum. Even though the husband was a well-known surgeon, they were not allowed to work here, and they were really suffering with a life that they couldn't live fully. And the practice, how we allow people to stay in Austria in asylum, must become more social and more humane. I'm convinced that once that happens, both sides will win. This is a very touching case, and I may tell you that this was done in 2013. So now, as we are in 2018, almost 5 years later, unfortunately, the situation has not improved. I'm personally involved as I may call myself a foster parent to a young 29-year-old Sudanese doctor, also a doctor, who is now in his 4th year applying for asylum, also not allowed to work. And the irony of the situation is, or maybe the cynicism of the situation is, that Austria has a tremendous shortage of doctors. So not only is it an inhumane way to go about how we treat people who come, but it is also not a thought-through policy at all. Economically, it would make a lot of sense to allow, especially those who have a talent in areas where Austria badly needs brains and good hands, to allow refugees to work. I'm still active, and I hope that some change will come, even though with the new government, I'm afraid the signs are not so good.
Talking about the new government, I remember I'm informed yesterday, or a couple of days ago, that there's going to be a demonstration tomorrow organized by SOS Mitmensch. I guess the aim is also to fight against rightist extremists, especially as a new political trend, and to call for civil courage for protection of human rights, especially those of refugees. How do you interpret now the situation, or political and social situation in Austria or in Europe?
Yes, tomorrow there is, I believe it's the second big demonstration directed to create more awareness in the public at large that there are certain tendencies in Austria that are worrisome. Of course, the world knows that we have a new government now, and that the new government includes the Freedom Party, FPÖ, which in the past has had a very checkered record in terms of human rights attitudes, especially when it comes to refugees. And so people are watching and are very concerned what may happen now. And the first signs are indeed rather discouraging. For instance, and it's apparently the new government, including the conservatives, that are now advocating that refugees who come to Austria applying for asylum, that they should no longer be cared for by families where they can stay and perhaps learn the language more easily, become integrated. No, the proposal is to have them concentrated, that's even the word used, on the outskirts in Vienna, in some kind of big house, so that they can always be available for questioning and what have you. And explicitly, this was defended by a couple of prominent members of the FPÖ, saying, well, we want to send out a signal to the world that it's not supposed to be cozy in Austria. Coziness was never an argument. What it boils down to and what matters is decency.
Decency. A lot of things are in the West actually under the framework of law, right? Legal framework is the most important thing. Sometimes moral argument is not as important as legal framework, I think. A couple of days ago, I read in an Austrian newspaper called Der Standard, I came across this article called 100 Euro Strafe für provokantes Spannen einer Fahne. This is actually, as you can see, a flag of Israel. So I guess it was because of Trump's declaration of Jerusalem as Israeli capital city. And then there's also this demonstration in Vienna. And within this demonstration, two protesters held up this flag, national flag, the Israeli flag. And then because of this, the police asked them to pay 100 euros as the Strafe, as the punishment, the fine, right? So to say, I mean, the reason is that they with their very provocative way, disturbed the public order. So is it actually legally or illegal to hold up a national flag when it is not an Austrian national flag?
That's a very good question. I did see this article also at the time, and I was also totally puzzled and amazed that holding up a flag should be the grounds for a fine or arrest or questioning, what have you. Mind you, I also believe that the action by Trump to decide that the embassy, U.S. embassy should move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem was certainly very much premature and a setback to the peace process. So I'm very, very critical of this move. And I'm also understand that people go to the street to protest that. And if, as part of the protest, those who are apparently in favor of the initiative and would hold up the Israeli flag, well, like these two demonstrators or participants did, that should also be tolerated in a society that claims to be fully cognizant of Article 11 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, namely the freedom of free expression. So I find it hard to believe that there is actually a law disallowing holding up a flag of another country. We all know at the Olympics, wherever, you cheer for your own country and you hold up a flag. And certainly the Austrians in winter sports, as you know, are always proud if some Austrian wins, and then there are the fans who hold up the flags and wave the flags. So exactly. I think it's a bit weird. We have some ridiculous laws in Austria. If that indeed is a law, I think it should be changed.
You just mentioned again this UN Declaration of Human Rights. Tell us more about this declaration.
Well, since you invited me to to this interview, I checked the.
Yeah, I saw you prepared something for us.
I checked the internet again.
Great.
And reread the Declaration of Human Rights, and there is something that definitely caught my attention. As we know that there is the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was promulgated right after the Second World War in 1948 in Paris. And then there is the European Declaration on Human Rights, then in 1950 in Rome. What caught my attention is already the preamble to the Declaration of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There it reads, it's the first preamble, whereas recognition of the inherent dignity of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. So these two words, dignity and family, human family and dignity, did catch my definite attention. Dignity. In German, die Würde des Menschen, the dignity of each individual. That's universal. And how dignified is it? And now I come back to your question here in Austria, that we treat people in a manner where they are certainly regarded as not welcome, second-class citizens, you name it. That's not a dignified way. I believe we should treat people in a way that allows us to open our eyes and look into our own eyes in the mirror. That doesn't mean that there should be a policy doing away with all frontiers, and Austria, of course, cannot have 10 million people coming to Austria. I mean, that's impossible. There has to be certainly a regulated process. But it's very clear that those who are refugees, who escape from war, from murder, or who escape also from life-threatening climate changes, that we should have open hearts for them.
Well, yeah, in Europe, refugee problems or this kind of xenophobia is really being a hot issue. Terrible situations have happened.
Well, speaking of Europe, I mean, you asked this earlier on. Here we have this, the so-called Visegrad countries. Visegrad countries. Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, and Poland. All of them said, we don't want any refugees. Very clearly. They are violating, of course, the resettlement agreement that has been reached already, which, by the way, is only a token anyway, because it doesn't apply to a great many people. But even that they dishonored. And here, these countries are net receivers from the EU budget, and with significant lots and lots of money. I believe that there should be sanctions on the part from Brussels to those countries that are totally unwilling to show solidarity when it comes to a joint solution. It's a problem that concerns all of Europe, and if some of them want to opt out of that, out of solidarity, out of humanity, there should be sanctions. They shouldn't get away with that.
Sanctions in Asia to do with human rights are also pretty well known. I don't know if you also pay attention to the human rights situation in Asia or say in China. As you see, I'm an ethnic Chinese, so sometimes I fly back to China to visit my parents. And not long ago, when I flew back in the plane, I saw a newspaper called China Daily. In that newspaper, I noticed one article. That article talked about a white paper issued by the Chinese State Council Information Office, I think. I brought the newspaper today here. It is to do with new progress in legal protection of human rights in China. And it's really a very long article. And there's a summary, like short article here, which has one paragraph summarizing the 6 points or 6 parts of this improvement in the legal framework. That is promoting law-based administration, enhancing judicial protection of human rights, consolidating social mechanisms, strengthening party leadership in the legal protection of human rights, and promoting development of global human rights. What do you think of the human rights situation in China right now?
No, with China, there is, in my view, a very interesting situation. It's quite clear that there is a violation of human rights in China in a large, in many areas. We know that there is censorship of the press. We know that there are certain media like Facebook and Google are barred from operating there. There is certainly a violation of Article 11, freedom of information, freedom of speech, and all that. And then we see that China is becoming more and more an enormous world power. What few people realize that actually China almost owns the United States.
How should I interpret that?
Well, if you look at the reserves that China has assembled, it is full of U.S. Treasury paper, trillions. If China wanted to, it could, in terms of game theory, it would have a tremendous power in the financial realm to exercise its influence. And everybody knows how powerful China is also in terms of trade, in terms of the economy. And this is why there is restraint on the part of many delegations going to China, not really addressing fully the human rights issue to the extent that they should. However, as China becomes more and more powerful, more and more international, more and more a global player as an investor all over the world, with more and more Chinese becoming well off. We see it already now in tourism in Austria. We're welcoming the Chinese. And I know the numbers of them. We will have double-digit growth in with Chinese visitors. It's inevitable. When they come, of course, they see all the newspapers. They know what's going on in the world. And also those who do business globally are fully aware of what is really going on. Gradually, I'm sure that all that knowledge will create pressure also inside China to become more tolerant, more open, also moving more towards democratic principles. Of course, we don't have a full democracy in Russia, as we know, but at least we have elections with opposing candidates, which is perhaps a token, but it is a development. And in China, I certainly predict that it's just only a matter of time before there is an opening of the society towards more tolerance, more freedom of expression. But that shouldn't mean that the world should lean back and not be critical. Also, I think it's a disgrace what's been happening in Tibet. That, to me, here is a tremendous culture, a culture on the part of the Tibetan people, and that has been practically suffocated. I would advise, if I were asked, the Chinese government to double check its own policy in this regard. I think the culture and the people of Tibet would deserve that, and I think the whole world would applaud if this were happening. And there are so many refugees in India, as you know, who would love to return to their own home country.
Whatever is happening, Chinese government, as you mentioned, is really playing more and more of an important role in the world stage, economically, politically, culturally. I think more and more people know the so-called One Belt, One Road initiatives, and this infrastructure bank in China has also attracted a lot of attention. Even Austria is a membership country. So Chinese government believes that with its influence in the world, it can actually use its old wisdom. China has a very long history that we know, more than 5,000-year history. So Chinese government believes it might be able to use the old Chinese wisdom to solve the current social problems around the world. In this sense, also helping the world to protect human rights. Do you see any light there?
Yes, I apologize. I did not respond to your earlier question from your article, the legal framework. But now you're coming to this because indeed the sixth point was then that China could indeed perhaps contribute something to the global human rights situation by sharing the Chinese wisdom, by making it better known and better accepted. Well, there is something to this point, in my view, because China has such a rich tradition, culture, history, the Chinese philosophy. There is indeed so much to share. What I find a bit problematic is that how has China itself applied this wisdom in then barring freedom of speech, freedom of free expression. So it's a bit cynical when this is said, but in terms of the actual substance, yes, I think the world would be a lot better off by accepting, learning, appreciating the culture of your great country. And you as a Chinese, I can see why you are proud of your country.
Thank you. Yeah, well, I believe East and West, we can all learn from each other a lot. I think human rights are facing a lot of new challenges too because of this world situation. Everything is coming together. And we don't know what's happening right now, and we don't see much what might happen in the near future. As an expert in this area, I'd like you to shed some light for us, anticipating a bit of our humanity in the future.
Yes, there is grounds for concern because all of a sudden Europe is confronted with a large number, and the problem is that it all happened too fast and in too big numbers. But Europe is grappling with the question, how do we treat people who are Muslims? That's the single most gripping issue where Europe has not really come up with an answer. There are those who say Europe is, a Christian continent, and why should we open our arms to them? Look how intolerant they are, and so forth and so on. At the same time, freedom of religion is part of the Charter of Human Rights, but we do see an imported anti-Semitism as a result of a wave of many Muslim refugees, and that is no surprise because in countries like Syria, Syria has never accepted the right of Israel to exist. And people who come from Syria, and so many young male people who are coming, they have been indoctrinated that Israel is the enemy and what have you. So we have this phenomenon of an imported anti-Semitism. And we have had the phenomenon, for instance, in Austria, where Austria has made the mistake not integrating Muslim, especially from Turkey, when they came to Austria as so-called guest workers some 30, 40 years ago. there are still, unfortunately, many Turkish, now elderly women who can hardly speak German because they always stayed within their own subculture. And so they missed out on an integrative opportunity, but so has Austria. There are now, there is a greater sense of awareness that something needs to be done about that, but whether it will be quick enough to relieve the anxiety of people who are concerned with that big wave of Muslim refugees now here remains to be seen.
Well, Dr. Löschner, I think you are also the initiator of a project called Alpine Peace Crossing. I think this might be a project for the future of humanity, in a sense. Tell us something about this project.
Well, I think I mentioned briefly at the beginning of our interview, and this was now 10 years ago, that I founded Alpine Peace Crossing when I became aware of a totally forgotten chapter of post-war Austrian history. It was in 1947 that these were so-called Eastern Jews from Poland, from Belarus, from Romania, Hungary, you name it, were faced with a continued anti-Semitism. This, even though Hitler was passed, but the anti-Semitism continued to the point that there were terrible pogroms, and the most notorious of them was the one in Kielce in Poland, when 42 Jews were just slaughtered, killed in the open street. And that made the Jews in Eastern Europe, made it terribly clear to them, this is no longer our home. We have to go somewhere else. Our lives and those of our children are so threatened here, we have to leave. And so that was the exodus wave from Eastern Europe. And what is little known, 200,000 Jewish refugees came to Austria after the war, from Vienna to Salzburg. And then but in those days after the war, as you know, the film Exodus, nobody wanted any Jews. So where can they go? Here they cannot remain in Eastern Europe. Which country takes them? None. So the old hope of Theodor Herzl of the promised land in Palestine was a hope for many. And indeed, of those 200,000, 80,000 eventually made it to Palestine to find a new home. And I came across a tiny segment of that history at the time when a mountain guide told me about that when I was in the Alps near Krimmel. In a terrible thunderstorm, we were totally soaked, wet, and then my guide friend, Paul Rieder from Maria Alm, told me, Ernst, all right, we are soaked, but at least we have good shoes. And then he would point over to the mountain pass and said, over there after the war, where the Jews crossed, they didn't even have good shoes. And that caused me to research whether this was true, and every word was true, but I decided that it must not remain forgotten. So that's why I started, this is a long answer to your question, that's why I started Alpine Peace Crossing. And Alpine Peace Crossing is now both an annual event crossing the Alps step by step.
From where to where?
Step by step, it's from Krimmel, that's in the corner of Salzburg bordering Tyrol. Many people know the famous Krimmel waterfalls. So it's from there, historically, where that was the only way that they could reach Italy at the time, because the path through Tyrol was blocked by a joint effort between the British and the French. not allowing anyone through. So these desperate people were not deterred. They wanted to find a new home, so they went with their children a treacherous 15-hour trek, 2 days and nights over the mountains. Now we go that every year today. It's an 8-hour march, step by step, with refugees who are now in Austria today.
I see.
And Helen, let me show you something here. This summer in June, I hold it into the
Alexander van der
camera.
Bellen.
You will see here our state president.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know him, Alexander
sure,
van der Bellen.
Alexander van der Bellen.
And there is a quote, "Ich bin ja auch ein Flüchtlingskind. I am also a refugee child."
Yeah.
So that was in the first year of his state presidency. He came to us not only as guest of honor, he gave a fantastic speech at the Criminal Peace Dialogue, and on the next day he would march with us for the first leg of this crossing together with the refugees. At the end of June, 29, 30 of June 2018, will be the 12th Alpine Peace Crossing. So I may use this opportunity, Helen, to invite you and all your friends from Sinopress to come and join us. It's a beautiful spiritual experience.
Definitely. Yeah, it's going to be very inspiring, I believe, historically and for the future too. Thank you so much, Dr. Löschner. Thank you so much for this interview with Sinopress. All the best to you and to Alpine Peace Crossing.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.